Hi, this video is about how an Israelite should feel about Edom or an Edomite and an Egyptian. So I'm taking the topic from Deuteronomy 23 verse 7, which says, "You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, because you are an alien in his land." So there are those that teach that Edom or an Edomite is the devil. He's gonna burn in hell. He's all this kind of stuff, that we should hate him and all that kind of stuff, right? But I believe that's not biblical, because the Bible teaches that Edom and Israel are brothers. So in Genesis 25, 23 to 28, we see Rebecca, the wife of Isaac, pregnant, and she's having difficulties, and she prays to God, and God tells her that she has twins in her womb, and he says that two peoples and two nations will be separated from her womb. And the two children that are separated are Esau and Jacob. And later on in Genesis 32 verse 28, we see Jacob becoming Israel. God changes his name to Israel, and so he's the father of the Israelites. And in Genesis 36:8, we see Esau moving away from his brother, because the two of them were so rich that they could not live in the same area. The area wasn't enough for all their herds and cattle. So Esau moves from Jacob, and he goes and dwells in a place called Mount Seir. And then after that, we're told that Esau is Edom. Okay? So you got Jacob, who's Israel, and Esau, who's Edom. But these two are brothers. And much later on in Deuteronomy, God is speaking to the children of Israel, and he says to them, "You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother." So you can't hate him because he's your brother. So this whole idea of some are righteous, some are unrighteous, some are devils, is absolutely not biblical. And those verses that I've mentioned, you can check for yourself and decide. And the point I was trying to make there simply is that these people teaching this doctrine of hate are absolutely unbiblical, and it doesn't take much to prove them wrong. You just gotta check yourself. Now, the part of the verse that I really wanted to pay attention to was this part of the Egyptian. So it says, "You shall not abhor an Egyptian, because you are strangers in his land." And I find that so interesting, that word strangers or alien in his land, because I would have expected it to say, because you were a slave in his land, but it doesn't say that. I mean, we know, and it's even in the Bible, it's recorded that in Exodus 1, 9 to 10, it says that the Israelites saw that the Jewish people, because the Jewish people were multiplying and they were becoming rich and numerous, they saw them as a threat, and the Pharaoh said, perhaps if we go to war, these guys are going to side with the enemy and come against us, So let us enslave them. And they did. In verse 14, it says that, the Pharaoh and the Egyptians made the lives of the Israelites bitter with hard bondage, and that all their service was with rigor. Yeah. And later on, it goes, these guys keep multiplying. Still, the harder they made their lives, the more difficult they made their lives, the more children they had. And later on, in verse 15, the Pharaoh even comes up with a plan and says, when these guys give birth, kill their boys, kill all the male children, and let the female children survive, So I think that is directly relatable to the experience of the Black Americans. The Black Americans was enslaved. They were treated with much bitterness and hard bondage, and they all their services were with rigor. They pretty much built America. They suffered all these kind of things. Their sons were killed. There were lynchings. There were even eugenics programs to literally sort of decrease the land of the blacks. So I feel like the experience is directly relatable. But what's interesting, like I said before, in the verse, it doesn't say you were slaves in the land. It says you were aliens in the land. And I checked that word, and it's really got nothing to do with slavery, it's more to do with like immigrancy sort of thing, being an immigrant, right? And it's interesting because this is how God sees it. God doesn't call it being a slave. And I'm not saying there were no slaves. There were slaves. Don't get me wrong. Even God Himself says, they afflicted you, and He says He'll punish them for their affliction. But the point I'm trying to make is the way God wants the children of Israel to see it is different from how you would naturally see it as a man. Okay, so in Genesis 15, this is before it happened. Genesis 15, verse 13, God is speaking to Abraham, and He foretells him that this is going to happen. He tells him, be sure that your children, your descendants are going to be strangers in a land that's not theirs, and those people are going to afflict them. But afterwards, I will save them, and they will not come out empty-handed, right? Later on, when Joseph has been in the land for some time, and his brothers come to him, and their dad is dead, and the brothers are scared that Joseph is now going to kill them. Joseph tells them, listen, you guys had a plan for evil, but God planned this for good, to save many people. So you see that God planned the children of Israel's residency in Egypt for good. Okay, although they were mistreated and all that, God's plan was good. Yeah, right. And out of it comes this idea of how we should treat strangers. Because you yourself have been strangers, you yourself have been afflicted. You should have a certain compassion for strangers, right? You should have a certain love for strangers, okay? So you can find that all over the Bible, and I'm going to quote Exodus 22:21. It says you should treat strangers well because you yourself are strangers. And He says Abraham also was a stranger in Genesis 23:4, right? And so the point of all of this is to say this. Black people, especially American black people, but this is I'm not American, but I feel the pain of the American black people. Sometimes I feel like what happened to them happened to me, and it can lead you to feel some sort of hatred, some sort of vengeance and stuff like that. You know the feelings. But biblically, it seems to me that God is saying, listen, I know it was hard, I know you were mistreated, I know it was unfair, I know all of that, but listen, I meant it for good. Don't sit and be bitter about it. Don't have a chip on your shoulder about it. Just you treat people nicely. You love those people who made you slaves. You love the Egyptian. You love a white man. Okay, so don't have this kind of lifestyle of hate, and you want to demonize people and hate people and all that. Love, that's what God is all about. So God is saying, love the Edomite, love the Egyptian. God bless you. Think about it and have a good day.